All right, let's dive into this fascinating world of Luisa Piccarreta and her concept of divine will.
Sounds good.
I've been looking over the excerpts you sent from her writing, and wow, this is some seriously intense mystical stuff.
Really is.
One thing that really stood out to me
Yeah.
is how she takes this idea of God's will,
Right.
which we usually think of as like following the rules.
Yeah.
And she just like blows it wide open.
She does.
It's not just about obedience for her.
It's not just checking things off a list, that's for sure.
It's about like this total merging, this complete union of your will with
Yeah.
God's desires.
Exactly. A total alignment, like in every single moment.
And it's wild. She doesn't just talk about it theoretically, you know?
Wow.
She describes these experiences of this union
Yes.
in such vivid detail.
Incredible detail.
Like there's this one passage where she talks about feeling Jesus within her so intensely that she actually like starts to experience his suffering.
Wow.
Almost like she's like physically being conformed to his crucified body. She even talks about feeling like the nails and the weight of the cross.
It's a very powerful image.
It's intense, you know, it really makes you think like, is she speaking metaphorically here?
Right.
Or is she suggesting like an actual physical experience?
It's definitely open to interpretation.
Yeah.
But given, the mystical context of her writings as a whole, I tend to lean towards her pointing to a real experience.
Okay.
A supernatural one, of course.
Right.
And this is key, she connects this particular vision to her intense prayers against the passage of divorce laws in Italy.
Oh, wow.
So it suggests that living in the divine will,
Right.
it isn't passive.
Yeah.
It's actively participating in God's work.
Interesting.
And sometimes that means intense suffering.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point because it really like challenges that common idea that we have.
That surrendering to God's will means like just sit back and let things happen.
Right. Right.
But Piccarreta is saying it can be like a very active
Yes.
and even, painful process.
Definitely.
So, okay, how does she actually explain this whole concept of merging with the divine will?
Sure.
Like, what does it actually look like to, actually do that?
Well, she uses this really powerful analogy.
Oh,
She compares God's will to the sun,
okay.
the constantly radiating good,
Oh,
and the earth
right.
receives that good
Yeah,
depending on like its openness to the sunlight.
right.
So similarly, a soul open to the divine will
Okay.
receives more of God's life and benefits.
So the more we surrender our own will,
Yes.
the more we kind of become like a conduit for God's will.
Exactly.
Almost like, I don't know, a solar panel soaking up the sun's energy
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
and, converting it into something we can actually use. Exactly. And Piccarreta claims that this receptivity to divine will leads to like these extraordinary effects.
Like what? Okay.
She describes souls becoming like the sun themselves,
Okay.
radiating God's love and light out into the world.
Wow.
They become immune to evil. They experience constant joy.
Okay.
And they even gain the power to be in multiple places at once.
Whoa. Hold on.
Yeah,
Okay, now that's where things get a little mind-blowing for me.
I get it.
Even for someone, who's interested in mysticism,
Yeah,
radiating God's love. Okay, that sounds beautiful.
right.
But like immune to evil
Yeah.
and bilocating, those are some pretty big claims.
They are.
How does that even work?
Well, it's important to remember.
Yeah.
These are claims based on Piccarreta's subjective mystical experiences.
Okay.
Whether we find them literally believable
Right.
depends on, our own individual worldview.
Sure.
But what's really intriguing is how she connects these effects to a deeper theological point.
Okay.
She claims God actually deposits all of his actions within souls who live in his will.
Wait, so it's not just that these souls are like doing good things in accordance with God's will.
Right.
She's saying they become like repositories of God's actions themselves.
Yes.
That has some like really big implications for how we understand like free will
Right.
and God's omnipotence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You've hit on a really key point.
Okay.
Piccarreta seems to suggest
Yeah.
a much more like interwoven relationship between human and divine action
Right.
than traditional theology often presents.
Okay.
She even compares it to God needing a place to deposit all of creation.
Wow.
because no other place has the capacity.
So for her, living in divine will,
Yeah.
it isn't just about personal piety.
Okay.
It's like participating in the very essence of God's creative and redemptive power.
Exactly.
That's like a radical idea.
It is.
So if living in divine will leads to like such an incredible union with God
Yeah.
and, access to divine power,
Right.
why does Piccarreta also describe such intense suffering?
That's a great question.
Like she even compares it to a living hell,
Wow.
saying the pain is greater than that of the damned.
Mhm.
How do we reconcile those two things?
It really gets to the heart of how Piccarreta understands suffering.
Okay.
So remember how she linked her experience of like being crucified
Right.
to her intercession for the world?
Uh-huh.
Well, she doesn't see suffering as something to be avoided, but as like a crucial part of aligning with God's purposes,
Okay.
especially those related to redemption.
So it's about like sharing in the burden of Christ's passion,
Exactly.
taking on like the weight of the world's sin and suffering
Yes.
to help, bring about redemption.
Exactly. She
Yeah.
sees these sacrifices as necessary to like break through the resistance to God's will and open up that flow of his grace.
That's a challenging concept. I mean, it makes me wonder, like, how does this align with other theological perspectives on like suffering and grace? For example, like how does Piccarreta's view
Right.
compare to, say, St. Augustine or Meister Eckhart?
That's a fascinating question,
Yeah,
and one that deserves like further exploration, for sure.
definitely.
While there are certainly similarities, Piccarreta's emphasis
Okay.
on the active role of suffering in the process of redemption
Right.
and that idea of God depositing his actions,
Right.
souls living in divine will.
Yeah.
I mean, they present some unique and potentially controversial perspectives.
This is a lot to take in.
It is.
Piccarreta's vision of divine will, it's complex, it's challenging,
For sure.
but also incredibly compelling.
Right.
I'm already starting to like rethink some of my own assumptions about, God's will
Yeah.
and how it operates in our lives.
Absolutely. We've covered some pretty profound concepts.
Yeah, it's like really made me think about how we talk about God's will, Like we often just boil it down to following rules.
Right.
Or just like accepting whatever life throws at us.
Just going with the flow.
But Piccarreta is talking about something so much bigger.
She is. It's radical.
It's this deep union, this active participation
Yeah.
in God's work. And as we were saying before, it's not always, easy or comfortable.
Right. Piccarreta is really honest about the tough stuff.
Yeah, she really doesn't shy away from the dark side of this journey.
She doesn't, like when she talks about those long stretches of spiritual dryness.
Yeah, like she's totally abandoned by God. There's that passage where she describes it as like a cruel tyranny of love. She said she feels like life itself is missing.
Powerful stuff. And what's really striking is how she offers that suffering back to Jesus.
Almost like a way of making up for her own like ingratitude or something.
Yeah, exactly. Even in her pain, she's still trying to align her will with God's will.
It's hard to wrap my head around that. Finding like meaning and purpose in suffering.
It's definitely a challenge to our modern way of thinking. We're all about avoiding pain.
Right.
But this theme of offering suffering to God, it runs throughout all her writings.
And it's not like she's into self-punishment or anything.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
It's about transforming that pain
Yeah.
into something powerful,
Okay.
into intercession, kind of like how we understand Christ's sacrifice.
Right. It reminds me of that part where she's feeling like almost free of suffering. And then she sees these people from her town, they're plotting against the church.
Oh, wow.
And she says to Jesus, you're giving these guys too much freedom. You got to stop them.
So she wants him to intervene.
Yeah, like directly. But Jesus says, no, their freedom is important so people can see good from evil.
And then he says something really interesting.
What's that?
He says he's tired of humanity's behavior.
Wow. Even Jesus gets weary.
It seems like it.
Yeah.
And because of that, he's going to make Piccarreta suffer.
So the evildoers will be weakened.
That's what he says. And that goes back to the idea of her participating in redemption.
Even though it causes her so much pain.
Exactly.
That's a heavy burden, especially when you think about how she was bedridden for most of her life.
Right. You'd think she'd want comfort and peace.
Not all this intense mystical stuff and suffering. What kept her going?
I think it was this unshakable belief that living in divine will was the ultimate good, no matter the cost.
So suffering wasn't a punishment to her. It was like this, I don't know, this crucible.
Yeah, crucible for growth and transformation.
It makes you think about how much we try to avoid suffering today.
Right. We just want comfort and ease.
Piccarreta is saying there's this power in embracing suffering, like a radical empathy.
Sharing in the suffering of Christ and everyone else. And it's not just her, you know. A lot of mystics and saints have talked about this.
Yeah, like St. Francis, Mother Teresa.
Exactly. So much hardship, but also so much love and joy.
Okay, but I'm still trying to understand what this looks like in everyday life. Is it about these big, dramatic acts of self-denial?
That's where Piccarreta gets really interesting. She gives us these little glimpses into how this surrender actually worked in her life.
Like in practical terms?
Yeah, like that part where she's trying to explain her inner state to her confessor.
Oh, yeah. And the words just won't come out.
Right. She says it's like a sleepy kid being forced awake and throwing a tantrum.
And Jesus just says, if you have me, you have everything.
Beautiful, isn't it? Like words aren't enough anymore.
And to describe that union. So it's not just about outward actions or prayers, right?
Right. It's this deep interchange. It affects everything.
Even how you communicate. It's like you see the whole world differently.
Through the lens of God's will. And there's another part where Jesus says, before dying, the soul must make everything die in the divine will and in love.
Whoa. So it's an ongoing process.
Always. Letting go of our own stuff.
So you don't just achieve this state of union and then, like, you're done.
It's a journey. A constant dying to yourself and being reborn.
That takes a lot of trust.
It does. Letting go of control and letting God work. Even when it's hard or confusing.
That's got to be scary for some people, like surrendering your will, dying to yourself.
Yeah, it can sound like you're losing who you are.
Becoming a robot or something.
But Piccarreta says that's not it at all. She says it's more like two beings appearing together, but one who doesn't disappear cannot enter into eternity to take part in all of God's acts.
So you don't lose your individuality, you become more yourself.
Exactly. More fully realized. And she talks about leaning into Jesus. The more we lean, the more he gives us.
So it's this back and forth, not just passive receiving.
It's like a dance or a love affair, you could say.
With the divine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like any love affair, there are ups and downs.
Highs and lows.
You need unwavering faith to make it through.
This divine will thing is intense.
It is. Not for the faint of heart.
But also, like, really inspiring.
It is. It makes you question everything you think you know.
About suffering, surrender, our relationship with God.
For sure. So as we move into our last segment, I'd love to talk about how this all connects to the world today.
Yeah, like, what does divine will have to say about what's going on around us? It's like, the more we go into Piccarreta's writings, the more I realize this divine will thing, it goes way beyond, like, just personal spirituality.
It really does.
It's connected to something much, much bigger.
Like a whole different way of understanding, well, everything.
There's this one passage where Jesus tells her, my daughter, my will is son,
Right.
and one who lives in my volition becomes son. And he goes on to explain, like, how this son of God's will, it's what allows him to, like, look at the world and pour out all this grace and blessing.
It's like we become these lenses or something.
Yeah.
Focusing that divine light.
It's such a beautiful image,
But-
but I'm having trouble, like, wrapping my head around it.
Okay.
How do we actually become these sons,
Right.
you know, reflecting God's will out into the world?
It's a tough one, for sure.
Yeah.
Piccarreta doesn't, like, lay out specific steps.
Right.
But I think she's pointing to, like, a total shift in perspective, seeing everything
Yeah.
through this lens of, like, God's loving purpose.
So it's about, like, recognizing how everything is connected
Exactly.
and understanding that our choices, even the small ones,
Yes.
they have this, like, ripple effect. They can impact the world around us.
It's not just about these, you know, grand gestures or, like, heroic acts.
It's about finding that divine will in the ordinary, everyday stuff.
In every little thing.
But hold on, if living in divine will is all about radiating God's love
Right.
and grace,
Why is there so much suffering in Piccarreta's experience?
that's a good point.
We talked about, you know, her feeling Jesus's crucifixion in her own body.
Yeah.
It seems like the opposite of, like, being a sun shining God's light.
Right. It's definitely a paradox
Oh, it is.
at the heart of her whole vision.
Yeah.
But she seems to be saying that suffering, when you, like, embrace it
Okay.
and offer it back to God, it becomes this, like, powerful source of redemption for yourself
Okay.
and for the world.
Do you remember when she talks about her suffering
Yeah.
as like intercession for those people
Right.
plotting against the church?
It's like she's taking on their sin
Okay.
and offering it up to God.
But if God is like all powerful
Right.
and all loving,
Yeah.
why wouldn't he just, I don't know, wipe away all the sin and suffering himself? Why involve us humans?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
It's something theologians have wrestled with forever.
Right. And Piccarreta doesn't like give us a clear-cut answer.
Okay.
But her writing suggests that God wants us involved. He wants us to, co-create with him
Okay.
in his plan for the world.
So it's not like we're puppets or something, just dancing to his tune.
Exactly. He's inviting us to collaborate.
Wow. That's a big responsibility.
It is.
What if we, mess it up?
That's the thing.
What if we don't live up to, like, that calling?
Piccarreta talks about that.
Okay.
She describes these times of, like, intense spiritual darkness, feeling abandoned by God,
Wow.
even doubting if she's on the right path.
It's like reassuring to know that
Yeah.
even someone who had these, profound mystical experiences still struggled with those things.
Makes her feel more human, right?
It does. It really does.
Reprehensible.
It's good to know that even in those dark times,
Yeah.
she never completely lost faith,
Right. She kept leaning into that divine will,
even when it was hard.
trusting that God was working things out, even if she couldn't see it.
It's so easy to get caught up
Right.
in those like mystical parts of her writings, the visions, the extraordinary experiences.
Yeah.
But for me, it's really her faith
I agree.
and her willingness to, embrace suffering
Yeah.
as this like path to deeper union with God.
It's challenging, but also so hopeful.
It really is.
Piccarreta's vision of divine will, it's not about passively accepting fate.
No.
It's about this like active, often painful process
Right.
of surrender, transformation, and co-creating with God.
It's like she's asking us to see the world with completely new eyes
Exactly. To recognize how connected everything is.
and to live our lives
Yeah.
in a way that, reflects God's love and purpose.
There's a lot to ponder.
It is. I think we'll be thinking about this for a long time.
Me too.
Yeah.
And for our listeners, I encourage you to do the same.
Yeah.
Sit with these ideas, explore Piccarreta's writings. See if you can find, glimpses of divine will in your own life.
That's a great suggestion.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Into the mystical world of Luisa Piccarreta.
We hope you found it, inspiring and thought-provoking.
Definitely.
Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.